Why, hello everybody, and welcome back. I'm Random Randy, and thanks for popping into the channel. And so today we're gonna get into fire, kind of picking up after the last video about the Easter Island fire. I've got a couple of really great comments on that already, kind of talking about how suspect these fires are and how possibly those moai on Easter Island may just be poured concrete. And I'm with that thought. I've got some stuff coming up for everybody on the pyramids themselves and some information that I was able to find uh, in a blog post. And there's a lot of information coming out of Russia, oddly enough, kind of dealing with the Tartaria hidden history, kind of thing. So it's an alternative narrative, but a narrative nonetheless. Today, we're going to look at fires in history. Um, it's wild, guys. I just see this as a renewing force in a sense. I can see, why fire would be used to destroy and pave the way for the new kind of paradigm. Um, the symbolism in itself is interesting. But let's take a look at great American fires of the 19th century. Now, during the Industrial Revolution, United States was afflicted with many urban conflagrations. It's a keyword. We'll check back into that here in just a little bit. Now, this is just a list of like the 1800s here: Portsmouth, Detroit, Newburyport, Washington, Buffalo, Boston, New York, Pittsburgh, Nantucket, St. Louis, San Francisco, East Boston, Troy, New York, that is, Atlanta, Lawrence, Richmond, Kaiser Burnout. I mean, dude, it just goes on and on and on. And so these are some of the images from those those fires, and of course, they're all going to be etchings and things like that. The photography that we have from early 1800s is shaky, iffy at best, but there's tons of engravings. Washington D.C. set on fire during the War of 1812. Now that's really the only fire we're like told about in the narrative in 1812, uh, which is weird. There was supposed comments. I mean, there's all kinds of weird stuff going on in the 1800s. Now these are just you know probably paintings that used to sit in somebody's living room, right? Sketches in somebody's sketchbook. Let's see, engravings for newspapers. So there's a big push for these stories. And I'm not going to narrate every single fire that we see here. But I did want to bring this up, guys. This list of town and city fires. Okay. This is crazy. Like antiquity to the Middle Ages is just on and on. And now all of these fires have their own individual story. Each one kind of symbolizes a coming of a new paradigm. So you can see here kind of, every 5, 10, 15 years when something old needs to go away and something new needs to come in. What better way to usher that in than fire? So we're not really going to touch on any of this specific fires today. There's so many here that we could just get lost in this for like hours and hours. But I'm trying to keep it short. Trying to just open the conversation and see what you all think. I think it's suspect to say the least, especially when you get all the way up through the 19th century and you've got like what, a half page, 18th century, like half page, and you get to 1800s and it's like on and on and on and on and on and on, all the way down to 1899 in Puerto Rico. So there's a lot of interesting places on this list. Seattle, Spokane, I mean Calgary, like you name it, the Thumb Fire in Michigan, right? 1870 Chicago, Great Boston Fire, 1872, the very next year. Actually, it was a few months later, if I'm not mistaken. Medina, Ohio, right? I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and this list is extensive, and it doesn't stop in the 1900s. It goes on and on and on again. Now, you would think that with all of the newfangled chemicals they can use to put out fires, the ability of current firefighters, the science behind what is a fire, what makes it burn, how can we stop it? You would think with all of these things being understood, there would be a lessening of some kind. Uh, at some point, and there just isn't. And you know, the 2000s are looking, let's not say promising, but they're looking to be, you know, the most fire ridden you know, century yet. Now, what I find interesting, guys, is, you know, conflagration is a word that comes up. Now, if you go look on Wikipedia, you'll see that conflagration is a large fire, right? And you'll see no other real explanation for it. But what's interesting is if you take it a step further and you go and look up some synonyms, synonyms being words that have similar or same meanings, what we wind up with is, uh, of course, a destructive burning. Synonyms maybe being fire, holocaust, inferno, a blaze, a bonfire, right? So those are words related. Now keep that in mind. Words related to conflagration: brush fire, campfire, forest fire. Now, if you go to Wikipedia, the only uh, specific, you know, example is uh, accidentally or naturally caused large fire, right? But again, back to the synonyms, we're going to look at some, uh, you know, and this is based on Merriam-Webster. You know, they write the dictionary, they tell us what things mean, and they're telling us right here that a synonym or a similar meaning word for conflagration: conflict, we have hostilities, we have hot war, we have war, words related to conflagration: civil war, cold war, holy war. And we have these going on throughout time, right alongside these fires in this list. We have many different types of war: combat, fighting, warfare, right? So a world war is even one of the related words. So you know, that's interesting to say the least to me. And you know, we want to go ahead and look at some Boston fires here. We're just going to take a look at a little slideshow, and you guys can tell me what you think about this. These are, you know, they're posing for these. They are, you know, supposedly cleaned all this up with horse and buggy. This is supposedly fire damage. I don't see any real extensive burning. Um, a lot of masonry knocked down, right? And these places are huge. You can see just the size of these windows next to these people. These are massive buildings that were burned down. So you don't see any of this, right? You don't really see any of this going on. And you see a lot of what looks like iron or steel. So these are going to be from North America for the most part, guys. Some Canadian, um, and I don't have all the list with me, but you know, just for conversation's sake, take a look in the background. Take a look at the thickness of the walls that were brought down, the amount of steel and, you know, iron, and I mean, these look like precast columns here, guys. You know, and we're told that that, you know, this the steel age or the iron age was really not integrated into construction, you know. But I mean, to me, you know, and I've said this in another video I have on here, the might have been the Battlefield Earth one or something, but this looks exactly the same, not that, but it looks exactly the same as what we see in Nagasaki, in Hiroshima, what we see when we look at uh, photos of World War II. You know, at the end, we're going in, we're saving the day, we're, you know, heading into Berlin and Germany, and we see a very similar thing happening in these places. So you know, I'm of the mind that conflagration can can be a little bit of both. It can be a little bit of arson. It can be a little bit of, you know, conflict, Cold War, Civil War, Hot War, right? So you can tell that there was some form of a plan or an initial inkling that these places were going to become available, because as you see in the signs here, they're already allocated to, you know, the new bank in town, right? And I mean, look at this, we'll call it Romanesque. A lot of people are sticking with the Tartarian nomenclature for this infrastructure. While I do think it was like kind of a widespread civilization, I still do think that there was a control mechanism in place. Everything was not, to my mind, as free as a lot of people are liking to believe when they're thinking of Tartaria. Not quite as technologically advanced, um, up front, anyway. Now you will always have people in the background doing great things, kind of compartmentalized, much like today. Greatness within their specific groupings, and so I think that was taking place back then too. But my thought is we got to the end of an analog era, or much like in the Vedic texts, or some spiritual or religious type teachings, you see this kind of transition from one age to another. Some of increasing, spirituality, some of decreasing. I think what we saw here was the end of a very materialistic era, that was not quite involved in energy the same way that we are today. Now, they may have actually had things like computers and processing capabilities that we don't see really becoming common until like the 1950s, where a computer would fit in a room, right? So if you extrapolate that back over time, just follow that trend of learning, of understanding, of miniaturization, all the way back, and what do you wind up with? You wind up with cities that maybe literally were circuit boards. Now, then the question comes up, like, who was computing things on these circuit boards? um some ideas that come to mind are larger people, a different type of, call it artificial intelligence, but I don't think, maybe it's not as artificial as we all like to believe and like to think. So those are just some thoughts that come up and some interesting things that are being thrown around. But the bottom line is this is a ton of masonry burned out, conflagrated. And I mean, look at these bowler hat types, right? If you ever sit and watch anime, you always see there's a war. Like Steam Boy, for example, is one you can look up, and there's a war. It's the end of a steampunk type era, and I think that this really was the end of a steampunk type era, a little bit more than we're led to understand, anyway. Well, was it as fantastic steampunk Victorian as some would like to believe? I know personally, I would love to believe that and feel that we had a society that was, conducive to that kind of beauty and overall freedom, and that just some outside force, right? Like bowler hat, top hat type people, suits, suits, right? So are these an outside force that came, infiltrated? Was there some form of a war, that like we're not told about, or we are told about? Maybe we are told about it, we're just told it's all these different little wars, and that the good guys win. We're always told the good guys win, you know but I don't know if this looks like the good guys winning. You know what I mean? And especially not to the other side. And we have the influx of theatrics, of media, um media magic, more spell casting kind of coming about in the early 1900s, late 1800s. um I think I'm relatively certain that cameras existed long before. We've uh just had the knowledge hidden from us. So the size of these things, I mean, this stuff is, you can see the remnants of a moon tower here, right? Or maybe not a moon tower, but definitely a large lamppost, with what looks like an incandescent type light fixture right here, and it's massive. All these buildings looking very, to quote some people, Tartarian, but old worldy, right? Made of masonry, probably a lot of iron in there. Now, what happens when you come into the understanding of how to create and make steel, right? You need to get this iron back. Just saying, you got to get all that iron back. What about when you learn how to create different types of concrete? You need to reclaim these rough materials, right? Or let's say they are just getting old. Let's say you're done with the analog era and you just want to bring in something new, something very different, something maybe more brutalist, right? Like what we see in the world today. Very quote modern, right? So, I'm not 100% sure that this is any kind of like spiteful, hateful, war mongering type situation. I don't know that it's like lizard people coming from outer space and taking over. Um, but there definitely did seem to be some kind of a power shift or a decision by those in power to rewrite everything. Does this happen a lot? Is the other thing that we wonder. Are there many resets? Are we stacked one on top of the other, generation or era after era, on top of the previous generation's remnants? So, the interesting thing that I'll point out about some of the fires and the areas that were burned is these were like the downtown financial districts, right? In all these areas. And that's something that, Matt at the Great Deception podcast and Casey at Golden Gate Starfort Command have something out on Golden Gate Starfort Command's YouTube. It's probably on Matt's YouTube at the Great Deception podcast. But they were talking about this too. Is it just a coincidence that these are all like the hot ticket areas of these cities and everything outside of these areas um that was left afterward looks like secondary kind of buildings, meaning they were maybe built with wood, even though they try to tell us that they weren't, and that the whole thing behind these fires was, um we have to purposefully get rid of all this stuff because it was wood. But and yet after the fires we have situations where the military goes in and completely, demolishes everything else in the city because it's, unsafe, right? Maybe much like happened in New York in 2001 where they had to reclaim building number 7. So, I'm just saying there's definitely some intelligence behind this. What is that driving force though? Is it greed? Is it, like a lot of people that are into the secret teachings are seeing, and are kind of conveying that this is a necessary pressure for humanity to achieve things. Do you agree with that? I mean, sometimes it makes sense, but other times, all the misery and the pain and the exploding of things and the removal of beauty, in order to instill like a very bland, brutalist existence, that doesn't make so much sense, right? Now, were they aliens? Like, were the worlds? Were they Martians or were they just from somewhere else? And furthermore, does the word Martian or Mars pertain to the ocean or Mara, right? And we're under maritime law now. So it would make sense to me that maybe Mars isn't so far away, right? Maybe Mars was just over the sea or over the ocean or a different area maybe we're not told about. With the whole flat versus round versus spherical debate, there's a lot of talk of outlying lands. Did these folks, these bowler hat, these top hat, these suit wearing Jesuits, right? Did these folks come from somewhere else? Or are they like an organic growth? Did they come about in about the 1500s when, the popes took over and the papal bull and all that? What exactly happened there? How did it happen? And how did they establish such a power, vacuum to where they can, rewrite history the way that they have been? But that's going to be about it here for today. I want to say thank you for tuning in. Just interesting fires, guys. I don't know what to make of it all. It does seem that it has been happening and will continue to happen and is a means for renewal. It's like a means for demolition. And it seems like an excuse. I'm not going to lie. It seems like an excuse to reclaim things. And it's crazy. I'm sure that there were insurance scams even back in the 17 1800s. Banks existed, insurance companies have existed since the at least late 1800s. So does that have something to do with it all? Is it just money? Is it just power, or is there more to it? Is it something more? So anyway, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope this information finds you well, and have a blessed day.